Thanks for tuning in. You're listening to the Embrace Mental Health podcast,
where we embrace a not-so-clinical approach
to conversations surrounding all things mental health. Happy Mental Health Monday, everybody, and welcome to the Embrace Mental Health podcast. I'm your host, Kelsey, and today I've got with me both co-hosts. It's another trio day, which is one of my favorite days. Got Wesley with us.
Hi, everyone.
And Autumn.
Hello.
And today we have our first ever Q&A episode. So we've been collecting questions over the last few months, and so we're hoping to get into that and answer some questions that people have sent us. But of course, first we have our question. I mean, it's still for us, but it's a different type of question. So this question is pretty intense. It's pretty deep. The question is, how are you? Actually, I think this was our very first question. I think Wesley said, how are you doing right now?
Like right now. Yeah.
Right now. Exact this moment. So
yeah.
I don't know if we're going that same vibe or if we're just kind of doing a check-in or what, but
yeah.
Wesley,
Well, I can get started.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Autumn. You go.
I was going to say, when I thought of this question, like, I was thinking, how are you doing really? You know, like, this isn't just like, oh, hey, how you doing? It's like, how are you? You know, we're checking in with each other.
All right. Perfect. It's good to check in with each other. It's a good mental health practice, right?
Right? Yeah. Make sure we're doing okay to be leading a podcast.
I feel like I'm not allowed to just say good. And that's not really a good answer. So I'll just go ahead and go because when I hear how are you and someone asks how are you really, I take a second to reflect on kind of this moment in my life. Not like this moment of my day, like the original question on the first episode, but the season of my life. And so I was thinking about this, and I feel like I'm in a little bit of a season of anticipation. As I've said multiple times on this podcast, I started a private practice, and it's growing nicely. But as both a therapist and a business owner, I'm always trying to grow it to where I have a full caseload as of right now. And so hoping to get to that point like sometime in the spring. So just thinking about marketing and sales and all that stuff that I am pretty good at but do not enjoy doing. So there's that piece of it. And then also definitely in my family, we have baby number 3 on the way, due to be born at the end of February. And so that's obviously going to have a huge impact in my personal life and just my everyday reality. Any parents out there or anyone who has been around little kids in any significant way, you know that it makes a huge change. So it's an exciting time. You know, this is all stuff that I'm happy about and looking forward to. Obviously, it comes with its own stressors, but the big challenge for me in a season of anticipation is, of course, staying present and trying to make the most of the present moment. I know that there will be a time where I look back on this time of anticipation and be like, you know, I kind of miss those days when I didn't have a full caseload, or those days when it was just 4 of us. That was kind of nice, and we didn't have a newborn. You know, but both of our kids, the first 6 months in particular, are very difficult, especially when it comes to sleep and just all the adjustments that are involved. So those are kind of the 2 big things that occupy most of my mental space when I have a second to slow down.
Yeah, that's a lot of, like you said, exciting things, but kind of life-changing things too. So,
yep.
Yeah, I'll go next. I'm just feeling a little bit scattered right now. So we've mentioned before that we always try to get ahead of our recording. And so right now we are in early January when we're recording this. And so I am still on winter break. I work for a school. And so I've had, the 2 weeks off for Christmas break, but I was like, oh man, this is going to be great. I'm just going to do a lot of resting and a lot of like just chilling out and trying to get some stuff cleaned up around the house. And now I'm like, dang it, school starts again on Monday and I don't feel rested. It's just like, it's always hard when you have kind of this routine and then you're out of routine for a couple of weeks and things get shifted. And like from the get-go, I feel like my circadian rhythm has been like, what is happening? And so I haven't been sleeping very well the last couple of weeks and just like feel a little bit off center just because my routine is out of whack right now. And so I'm just feeling a little, like I said, scattered, I guess would be kind of the word for it. The other thing though is we've actually had a couple of, I don't know exactly what to call it, but some people who want to like do some collaborations with us in terms of the podcast and some of that kind of stuff. And so I'm excited, but also just like a little bit nervous about that because the other thing is I'm a basketball coach and definitely January and February are my most crazy schedule months. And so I'm like, okay, how am I going to balance all these plates the next couple of months? And so like an excitement, but also just a little bit of a, nervousness about it. So.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It's always such a bummer when you're like anticipating this break and it's like, oh, this is gonna be so nice. And then you like blink and the break is over and you're like, what happened?
Yep.
Yeah. For me, I am doing well, which is like so counter to how I have been doing probably since we started this podcast. Not because of the podcast, just to clarify everyone. I was doing poorly even before the podcast started. But
Autumn's like, this is ruining my life. And we're like, yeah, you need to come anyway. Talk about mental health.
Right. Sounds super healthy. No. Yeah, I've been doing really well. Mental health wise, I've been feeling a lot more like capable and empowered lately. I recently just had a very large, explosive argument with someone in my family. And as of right now, they're not someone that I'm speaking to. And it was very strange. That's not something that happens in my family. The idea of putting up boundaries is a foreign concept. And it was something that I really needed to do. And even though it still feels weird, I'm just like, oh man, like I'm not a 7-year-old little girl anymore. You know, like I'm a grown adult who is like capable of taking care of herself. I've been given the tools by many a therapist. And so like I can do this. And so I've just been feeling like empowered and capable, and I feel like my medications are not giving me any problems right now, which thank the Lord. I Lord willing graduate this semester, and I'm loving my job. Things are just going well. I have really great community, and with that though is I've never been this type of person, but within the last couple of years I've noticed that I've become this type of person where I'm like waiting for the other shoe to drop, because my mental health is just so rocky and so unpredictable. Anytime that I feel okay, I'm just like, I never tell people that I'm doing well. I'm like, oh, like I've had a good like 2 weeks, you know, or something like that, because I never know like when I'm going to not be doing well again. So I have that little thing of anxiety in the back of my mind, like you're going to wake up tomorrow and the world's going to be on fire. But it's a lot smaller this time, you know, like something feels different where I'm like, I actually feel like regulated and happy, you know. So we're taking it as it is, literally just taking it one day at a time. But yeah, we're not complaining right now.
Love it. Autumn,
Yeah.
it sounds like you've had enough 2 step forward, 1 step back, 1 step forward, 1 step back, and just that journey of struggle in life. And eventually you can look back and say, hey, I've made some significant progress. The more time goes on, the more I realize just how important it is to have persistence. Like so many things in life, if you want to move forward, if you want to find success in the areas where you want success, then it just has to do with you just keep going and you learn from your mistakes and you just don't give up. And it's not necessarily about knowing something or being born with certain skills or anything like that. It's just you just keep at it, right? And even that's not a guarantee of success, but I feel like that's a super underrated characteristic to have, and that's where you find yourself. And so I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Great. Good question. Simple but good.
So that brings us to our rest of our questions. So these are questions that people have submitted to us either by email or over Instagram or some of the comments on our YouTube as well. And so, yeah, we'll dive right in. So it's we have a few questions that are a little bit eclectic almost, or just a little on their own. And then, unsurprising to us, we kind of had a number of questions around the whole medication thing, which is, perfectly, that doesn't surprise any of us that we had
loaded
some questions
topic.
off
Yeah.
of that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we'll kind of go through those more random seeming questions first, and then we'll kind of end with more of the questions around medication. But yeah, so the first question was given to us around the time that we had our mind-body connection episode. And so that question is, how do you like to regulate your psychosomatic symptoms?
Well, I wasn't necessarily on that episode. The connection between mind and body is something that I do think about and work in quite a bit. For those who aren't familiar with the term, psychosomatic symptoms are things that express themselves physically, but are really rooted in psycho or mental problems. And so sometimes people, in some of the more intense versions, people might go to the doctor over and over, try different medications, try different practices, and just addressing the physical aspect of it, and nothing is helping. And then eventually they may or may not come to realize that it has to do with their mental health, and that once they work through things with their mental health over the course of weeks, months, years, whatever it is, then they notice a positive change in their physical symptoms. Is that pretty accurate, Kelsey, would you say?
Mm-hmm.
Autumn?
Yep.
Okay. I just want to, okay. So how do I address it in my own life, or what is a good way that I think to address it? And I guess the approach that comes to mind for me is to try to, think of your symptoms as just that, as symptoms. Addressing the symptoms is not going to fix the problem. And so if I, like, for instance, in my own life, and I want to preface this because we're going to be answering questions about psychotropic medicine coming up here. And as always, we need to say that we are not medical professionals. We are not giving medical advice. We are giving our perspectives from our own respective backgrounds. So that being said, in my own life, like when I have a headache, I assume that my headache is not a problem. Like it's not a thing that is causing symptoms. The headache is a symptom of something else, whether I slept awkwardly, or I'm stressed, or whatever else it is. Maybe I need to kind of massage my own neck and shoulders or something. But I still will usually, if it's bad enough, I'll usually take an ibuprofen or something. I actually don't need to take a strong dosage for it to have an impact on my pain relief. And I think probably half the time it's placebo effect anyway, for me personally. But anyway, I'll still take something to treat that pain, and I will work on trying to address the problem. I will work on trying to identify, do I have tension in my neck and shoulders, as is often the case when I have a headache? Or thinking back to the previous night, did I sleep kind of awkwardly? Did I wake up in a weird position or something like that? Just to identify what that is. So addressing those symptoms, right? You don't have to totally ignore the psychosomatic symptoms, but to really then take a look at the problem and work on identifying it and working through it. I feel like that's a very general answer. Autumn or Kelsey, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, when I kind of think, I just was thinking, okay, like what would be my psychosomatic symptoms, or like where do I typically first notice my mental health physically. And just like sitting here, I was jotting down, I wrote down like 7 things. But I feel like when I'm thinking about the different stuff, so like for me personally, just for people to either relate to or be like, oh, okay, like I've never thought of it or that way or whatever. Sometimes I will get headaches when I have increased anxiety. I can definitely notice like increased body tension or muscle tension, chest pain even sometimes. The main ones for me would definitely be this like lovely double-edged sword of like I feel exhausted but I can't sleep. Like this whole exhaustion and insomnia combo, which is super frustrating. And then one of Autumn talked about this in our episode about that, but like my stomach is definitely like boom. It's wild how quickly my stomach responds to anxiety. Like I will go from feeling perfectly fine and then this anxiety trigger comes and I'm like, yep, stomach is toast. Like it's so quick. It's crazy. But another one that I've kind of realized within the last couple of years, which has been delightful, but I realize when I'm anxious, I cough a lot, which
Interesting.
is, yeah, I don't totally know exactly what it is, but my mom even has said like, yep, I can tell when you're anxious because you start coughing. And it's been really fun, with COVID, because everyone's like, oh no, she's coughing. And I'm like, it's not COVID. I'm just anxious. Like,
And your reaction is not helping.
right. Exactly. It's like wild, kind of weird one. But anyway, but I think a lot of it comes down to relaxation stuff for me. Deep breathing, muscle tension, just mindfulness, not to just exactly plug the 3 things that we had really some relaxation things on, but just those things to kind of help me slow down and turn down that stress response. And, and honestly, yeah, like I definitely will take my Tums and I will take a Tylenol for my headache or melatonin or something along those lines for trying to sleep. But really what it comes down to is trying to figure out some of those relaxation techniques to help turn down the volume on my anxiety a little bit. But yeah.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really think about addressing like my own personal psychosomatic symptoms, and I think the ones that I see the most are just like muscle tension. Sometimes it comes into my jaw, and I clench my teeth, and then I get tooth pain. I've actually cracked a tooth before several years ago, and had to have that filled. So thankfully, it hasn't been quite that bad for a while. But so again, massage. I'll just kind of do pressing circles on my jaw if that's the case or whatever. And yeah, it's usually either tension or lack of sleep for me or difficulty sleeping. And so that usually has to do with stress. And just like Kelsey said, trying to regulate my muscles, calm down my nervous system, but then also to think about, am I, usually sometimes it's just because I'm not sleeping very well. I'm more stressed when I don't sleep, and of course, when I am stressed, I have a harder time sleeping. So sometimes with little kids, there's only so much that I can do about that. But I do take a look at my life, my commitments. Am I burning the candle at both ends too much? That's kind of a usual suspect for me. And yeah, meditation, like these kinds of things. But I also try to take a look at like, are there changes that I can make in my life? Are there things that I can slow down on or say no to? So that's just the only thing that I would want to add to what I said earlier.
Yeah.
No, that's good. Kelsey, I did the same thing as you. I was kind of like taking notes of like, what does that look like for me? And the first thing that I wrote down is actually my teeth also clenching my jaw. Within the last 2 years, I have cracked three different tooths
That's a
in
bad
my
time.
sleep. Yeah.
Oh man.
And
Yeah, it's
so,
me too in my sleep. Yep.
yeah. And so every time I go, my dentist will be like, hey, like you got to lay off the hard foods. And I'm like, I was asleep when this happened. And he's like, right, okay. And so for me, this is less of a how do I stop myself from doing that? And more of like, how can I just, protect my body? And so
Yeah,
wear my bite guard. I wear my bite guard. That way, if I'm gonna be, chomping down on my teeth while I'm sleeping, at least I don't have to worry about cracking my teeth. Another like main way that my mental illnesses manifest is through like a racing heart. My heart just goes crazy, and I feel this like almost like this vibration throughout my bones and my body. And one of the only things that I've found that's actually helpful for me in that moment is running. It's like a very, very physical thing, but running's also a very mental thing where it's like I'm focused on what I'm doing. And most of the time, it definitely doesn't, completely take it away every time, but it does calm it down a lot. It allows me to put that energy somewhere else. And then the stomach thing. So yeah, if you listen to that other episode, I was very candid about my stomach issues when it comes to my anxiety. And so I have learned to treat, like when my anxiety is bad and it's causing me to have severe stomach issues, I've learned to treat my body similarly as I would if I had a cold or like the stomach flu. And so I will drink lots of fluids, and I will like eat very, very, very like clean foods, not eating a lot of sugar. I'm not eating a lot of carbs. I'm not eating a lot of things that's going to upset my stomach, because I'm trying to like calm it down. And again, none of these things are addressing the roots of what's going on, just addressing the symptoms. But the symptoms do exist. So those are the biggest ones for me. And then just like a general thing that I have in my life consistently is hot yoga. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but it's one of the few things that like I have in my life consistently that helps me meditate. It releases toxins. I get to spend an hour focused on deep breathing, and it's guided by someone, which is literally perfect. And so that's also really helpful.
Sweet. So our next question is, what are your thoughts on productive versus unproductive rest?
Somebody else want to go first?
I can. So I have a different perspective than, whoever asked this question may have been trying to get at. But a lot of times when I hear someone talking about how their rest is unproductive, it's coming from a place of defining productivity as like doing things that are perceived as like socially acceptable. And so there's definitely an actual like healthy component to rest that needs to be addressed that I'm sure one of my co-hosts is going to address. But for me, I really want to touch on the fact that like productive rest does not always look like, meditating for an hour or journaling or like listening to classical music while you lie on your back. I don't know, whatever you like think of when you think of productive rest, it's not always that. Sometimes productive rest is binge watching your favorite TV show, or it's like kind of zoning out by scrolling on TikTok, even though I'm not the biggest fan of TikTok because I think that is like it just sucks you into a whole different world, but whatever. And so I think if you don't get caught too much into the trap of like trying to be productive in your rest, because then you're trying to work in your rest, and then that can easily become unrestful. I hope I explained that well, but like I said, there's a healthy component that I'm sure one of my friends will say.
Yeah, I believe pretty strongly that the United States in particular has a productivity sickness, like a productivity obsession. And if you spend any significant time out of the country, or if you're listening to this outside the US, you will probably notice And I mean, there are exceptions. I spent some time in China, and people there are pretty set on productivity in general. Huge generalization, of course, um, but you'll notice that it's like in some places, for instance, naps are more socially acceptable for adults, or like not trying to, like they might not, feel the pressure to, they might not brag about how busy they are, for example, or they might not try to be productive literally for 8 hours a day for a 40-hour work week or something like that. That might not be as common of a thing as it is here. And I know that most people are not literally working 8 hours a day, but like a lot of people feel bad about that. They feel bad about taking rests or checking their social media during working hours. And, not to say that like you can't overdo that too, but we do have a productivity obsession, I think, just in general. So I think first ask that. It's like, am I like, is productivity actually a virtue in this situation? Sometimes for some of us out there, maybe we could do with a little more productivity in our life. Maybe we do, we have some things that we need to take care of, and we've been putting them off and putting them off, and we should work toward getting them done. That's great. But I think for just as many people, if not more people, like I was saying earlier, you might need to put your foot on the brake a little bit. So that's, I think, where I would start. And it's interesting, Autumn, when I first heard this question of productive rest versus unproductive rest, it's like, is my rest actually restful? And I think that is something that you spoke to, certainly, but I think that you heard it, and I think you're probably more correct than me as far as the intent of the question. You heard it as like, how do I be productive while I'm resting? But I'm thinking like how, sometimes you take a rest and whatever, you zone out for 30 minutes or an hour or even 5-10 minutes or whatever, and you actually feel more stressed at the end of it than you did when you first started taking that resting period. And so I heard it like, how do I take rest that is actually restful? And where my mind goes with that is dissociation. Dissociation is when it's that zoning out. It's like your mind is somewhere else, or your mind is really nowhere in particular, and you're just kind of shutting down for a little bit, whether you're scrolling social media, TikTok, whatever it is, or staring off into space, or whatever. And a lot of times dissociation really isn't restful. Sometimes it's helpful. Sometimes it's a coping strategy for high levels of distress, which are often rooted in trauma. So those are some things to explore if you dissociate a lot. But that's, I think, an important distinction to make, is it's like, when you're resting, are you present to that moment? Are you present to your resting? Are you intentional about it? Are you really there? Or is your mind off somewhere else? So that might be a good place to start, is to ask that. And if you find yourself coming out of your rest, like not really feeling any more rested, you can ask, was I really just kind of zoning out and dissociating and not present? And if that's the case, what do I need to address in my life to bring down that need to dissociate? And maybe next time I want to be a little more intentional. And maybe that does look like meditation. Maybe that does look like watching an engaging movie, or spending time with people socially in a restful way, or something like that. So yeah, it's tough because it looks different for everyone. I was mentioning earlier when we were just kind of taking a brief look at these questions, like for one person, I would say, yeah, maybe lay off the Candy Crush a little bit. And for the next person, I would say, no, let yourself play Candy Crush. That's great. That's what you really need. So it's hard to say a general answer for everybody when it comes to like specific things to do.
Yeah. I think part of it too is like there are different types of rest, and just like there are different components to who we are, like spiritual rest might look different than physical rest, or mental rest might look different than. So, I think one of the first things to do is kind of decide like, okay, what kind of rest is it that I need? Is it just literally physical? Like, do I just need sleep and to just sit down? Have I just been quite literally physically taxing myself? Okay, then physical rest might look like, yeah, taking a nap or sitting down for a while, or that kind of rest. For me, I know at the end of a day, I need some mental rest. Like my mind has been going all day. And so when I get home, I am one of those people who will play games on my phone for, 30 minutes to an hour, just to like shut my mind off for a little bit and get a little bit of mental rest. Because if I don't do that, my mind will keep going. So it like sort of distracts my mind, or helps me to like chill it out for that day. And so, there's all kinds of different ways to rest. And so, looking at that. And I think that's one thing that I want to do better this year is learning, okay, what is the way that I feel the most physically rested? What is the way that I feel the most mentally rested? How do I find the way that I feel the most spiritually rested, or all the different, emotional rest? Like, how do I find the things that are most restful in that time? And so then when you're like, okay, what kind of rest is it that I need right now? Then you can kind of figure out which one is going to be most productive for that type of rest that you need. But yeah.
Yeah. Very good point.
All right. Ready to move on to our next question?
Sure. Yeah. With all these questions, and this won't come as a surprise to my co-host, it's like I feel like we could go on.
I
It's like
know.
I feel like there's at least like one or two other points coming to my mind, but we want to keep this short enough that people will actually listen to it. So
Yeah.
let's
Right.
move on.
All right. The next question. This is a good one. How to differentiate mental illness and your mental struggles as a part of you, but not as your identity.
That's a deep one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the first place my mind goes with this is it's like we're talking about identity. And so what is the self really? Like, who are you? How are you thinking about yourself and defining yourself? Some people might feel like they, as an existing being, are not connected to their own minds in general, to their mental illness. They might see it as a totally separate part of their experience from actually existing and their identity. And yeah, for many people too, it's like this is really a part of who I am and how I define myself. So I think we need to start there. But one thing that I think about when it comes to the concept of mental illness, and I talked about this a little bit on our mental illness episode here, but and like diagnosing and this whole conversation is, in what way might the thing that is causing problems in my life also be kind of a superpower? In what way might it also sometimes help me and give me an advantage? For instance, anxiety is a very easy one. A lot of people out there live with high levels of anxiety and distress. And obviously that is a problem in their life, and it's understandable that they would want to change that. And I try to help people change that. But we don't necessarily want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. A lot of times that sort of anxious part of yourself is also the part that can plan ahead. It's also the part that is ready. Like, the reality is that if there's a crisis going on, I want to be around the people who are usually very anxious, because they're probably ready to respond to a scenario like that. But of course, for most of us, and hopefully for you who's listening to this, you're not in a crisis in the majority of moments of your life, right? That might be like 5% of your life or less where you actually need to deal with stuff like that. So it does cause problems for folks like that. But so a lot of it is like, what's the underlying thing that causes this mental problem for me? And in what ways does that help me? I think that's a good question to ask, because again, we can play around with this idea of symptom and actual root cause and problem. And so playing with that idea, it's like, well, maybe the challenge that I'm having in my life is actually a symptom of not managing this thing effectively. Whatever this drive is, whatever this energy is within myself, that could be redirected in a more healthy way. Whatever I'm doing right now isn't working very well. But the answer might not be to completely try to shut down that part of yourself. First of all, that's most likely not going to be realistic. But then even if you do manage to do it, it's like, well, you've kind of lost something valuable there as well. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, I remember one of the things that we did it was actually my undergrad program, but one of my professors, I think, had each of us write down, okay, what do you think is one of your greatest strengths and what do you think is one of your greatest weaknesses? And then we went through each strength and said, okay, what's actually a weakness of having this strength?
Mm-hmm.
Then did the same with the weakness. And okay, here's this weakness. What is an actual strength of this weakness? And I remember that being like really impactful to a lot of people, including myself. Like, okay, yep, I have this struggle with anxiety, but one of the like benefits of it or whatever is like I'm a sensitive person, which sometimes I'm like, golly, I wish I could turn this sensitivity off because it's really frustrating and harmful. But I guarantee a lot of my friends would say that's one of their favorite things about me is that I'm sensitive to them. And so, learning how to try and use it to your advantage, and then the ways that it harms you, try to learn how to cope easier within them, or those kinds of things too can be, yeah, helpful.
Yeah, this question is this was the most difficult one for me to kind of think through and develop any sort of response to. Um, I think I'm going to answer this like personally, how it says, how do you differentiate like your struggles as a part of you and not as your identity? So I'm going to take it very personally for me and say that um, I see my mental illness, a lot of the symptoms of it, as exactly what Wes was saying, as like this thing that I either was born with, I was given, was developed in me, whatever, that genuinely does suck sometimes, genuinely does suck a lot of the time. But there's a lot of peripheral things of it that benefit my life and they benefit the people in my life. And so I don't necessarily see it as this like cloudy thing that I don't see it only as this cloudy thing that follows me around. I try to have enough perspective to know that, yes, this is something that is hard that I have to work through. But also it brings goodness into my life and makes me a part of who I am. And so when it comes to the idea of asking about identity, I I I don't think it's as black and white as is your mental illness part of your identity or not. Um, at least not for everyone, because for me, in a lot of ways, like kind of like what Kelsey was saying, my sensitivity or my empathy, the way that I like actively listen to people, a lot of that is derived either from my mental illness or the trauma that has created my mental illness. And so those are things that I identify with, right? Being someone who's empathetic, who's an active listener, and at least from life as I know it, those things really wouldn't exist if I didn't have this mental struggles that I do have. And so I think that's a big part of it as well. And then I know for me personally, again, this is not everyone's worldview, but I identify as a follower of Jesus. And so I try to remember that my identity is also just in something much bigger than me. That like, that as much as I am inclined to take all of these things on as my identity, which is not necessarily a bad thing, there are things that do shape and define who we are. But like the deepest and truest identity I have is the one that who I believe created me has spoken over me, which is that I'm loved. And like that is my deepest identity. And I believe that about everyone, that the deepest identity that everyone has is that they are loved. And then everything else is not that it's not important, but it's secondary. So that would be my answer.
I don't know. I think that a lot of people have this perspective that whatever might be causing mental problems in their life is also something that is like a part of who they are that they don't want to lose. So I feel like that's kind of the other side of this coin. And so that, that's, I think, a valid perspective. And you might ask yourself, okay, well, what if I give it a try? Like if you decide to get on medication, or if you decide to work with a therapist or something to bring down these challenges in your life. If you see the part of yourself that you love starting to go away, you can get off the medication. You can go back to your old behaviors. You can, go back to your old thinking patterns. So that's something to consider. And sometimes I would think that if a mental challenge is causing enough havoc in my life, then I'd be willing to sort of take the risk, that, okay, this is going to change me, and that might be an okay thing. That might be something that I'm happy about. Another example I think is my understanding anyway, and I don't know that there's research out there to prove this, but I have learned anyway that like people with ADHD, for instance, are better than most folks at focusing on multiple things at the same time. Right. So if you have a lifestyle where you have to multitask a lot and you're ADHD, you might want to focus more on managing that than on medicating that. Whereas somebody else who has to have more singular focus and they struggle with that, they might want to, try to do something to change their brain chemistry to adapt to their life. And there's not really a good or bad answer for either of those people.
Yeah, to kind of think about this for me personally, this is, it's such a loaded question, and such a it has so much implications to it. But I mean, there's been times where it's been helpful for me to almost consider my mental illness almost as like a parasite, right? Where it's like this thing that has kind of attached itself to me, and sometimes I feel like it like eats away at me, or it sucks parts of me away, and all of a sudden I feel like I'm like, man, I don't really feel like I'm living in my true identity or who I truly am. And right now the anxiety is living through me. And that, I don't know, this sounds like a weird sci-fi movie, and I don't want to like get too ethereal out there. But at the same time, it's like this thing of like, okay, helping me differentiate, like me and my struggle of anxiety does not define, like when I have these moments of weakness, this does not mean that I still have these strengths. I have to figure out how to kind of work against it, or kind of treat it a little bit differently so that I can get back to my strength. And I know like one of the things that Wesley said, I can't remember which episode it was, but I think it was the medication episode, but where he talked about how, me now, he said, this is the most me that I've ever been. And that is what I feel like is like through my journey with mental illness, like my anxiety isn't who I am, but there's absolutely no denying that it's been a part of my story, and it's absolutely been a part of what has shaped me. And so trying to differentiate between those two, it is really difficult. But there are certainly times where my struggle with anxiety has tried to convince me that I am no longer these things. I am not strong. I am not powerful. I am not smart, or whatever it is that it tries to kind of trick me into believing, or like those areas that I struggle with for those times. But recognizing like anxiety doesn't get to take that from me, or doesn't get to make that untrue about myself, but learning how to either reframe it or fight back against it, or not let it have as much territory in my life, or whatever that is that it looks like. Trying to make that difference of like, okay, almost a little bit more of like a parasite kind of a relationship, rather than my anxiety is who I am. I don't know, but
yeah, a part of yourself.
Okay, so the next group of questions, that kind of brings us to our medication portion of the Q&A. So to kind of look at the first couple of questions we have for this, one of them is, how do you deal with the adverse side effects in medication? And a question about the thoughts of our thoughts on the dangers of idealizing medication, versus stigmatizing it, kind of finding that happy medium between. So, yeah.
When it comes to dealing with the side effects of medication, stay in good communication with your doctor or your psychiatrist, or whoever is prescribing those medications. I think that there's always the ideal outcome of finding medications that won't have side effects for you. Unfortunately, I've yet to find, some of the medications that I'm on right now, I don't have any side effects, but some of the other ones I do. I've yet to find what you may have heard me use this term before, medicine cocktail, like the medicines that work for you. I've yet to find a medicine cocktail that does not have at least one or two medications that does have side effects. And so, all the side effects are different. So I don't think we need to go into the super specifics of each one. But, I think being aware that they're probably going to happen. You're probably going to have some side effects. Recognizing that there are almost always alternative medications that you can try with your doctor. If it is a side effect that you really cannot live with, tell your doctor and be like, let's try another medication that's in the same class. Yeah, and you just kind of work through symptom management like you would for any other medication that has symptoms, and you really just have to ask yourself the question, like, which is like most important to me, having a medication that works or having a medication that doesn't have side effects. Doesn't always have to come down to that question, but if it boils down to it, only you know that answer for yourself.
I think too, it's always important too to recognize that, especially if you are just starting to take a medication, a lot of times those side effects are worse at the beginning, and then as you develop more of a tolerance to it or your body gets more used to it, some of those symptoms will start to go away. And so if you've just started a medication and you're like, man, I have these side effects, it's like you truly do need to give the medication a good solid couple of months before you can truly judge whether it's working and what those side effects look like for you. But if you have been on this medication and you've truly given it the old college try, it is a question. First of all, like Autumn said, keep in touch with your doctor. There are a lot of times where there are alternatives, and there's just so many different options out there. And so you can keep trying other kinds. And that's, what it took for me, because the first two that I took, I did have some pretty rough side effects, particularly just lethargy. Like I was just so tired all the time. And it was difficult where I was like, okay, I feel less anxious, but I also still don't really feel like me. And so it was like, okay, I want to talk with my doctor and figure out a different option. And we eventually did find one that, like, I really don't feel like the medication I'm on now really has any side effects, which is like, I feel very blessed to be in that place. But it is a trial and error, and it takes a lot of self-advocacy and kind of checking in and knowing, what you're willing to deal with. But also, I think in some ways this kind of goes into that second question about idealizing medication, is recognizing there are a lot of different types of treatment that are outside of medication as well. Now, while I am definitely a proponent of medication, and I think medication and therapy or medication and this is like the most effective, but recognizing like, okay, if this medication, I don't have too many side effects, but it like only sort of works, then like, okay, bump up your therapy or bump up some, try all the different things, because it's never going to be, you take this magic pill and you're not sad anymore, or you see this therapist 3 times and you never have to deal with this anymore. It's a consistent effort on your part. And so, thinking about like, okay, mental health medication is not a magic pill, but it can be a very useful tool in your mental health journey. So,
yeah, I have 2 things to add to this that I hope will be valuable. One, and full disclosure, I have never personally taken medication to manage my mental health. So whatever that's worth to you as a listener, as far as the value of my opinion. But it is something that I talk to clients about quite a bit. Obviously, I've talked about it on this podcast. So the first thing is, I think we need to be careful about not judging other people. I think that, whether somebody is highly resistant to medication, like they, are very reluctant about it, or if somebody is like, that's their first line of defense, the first thing that they try, I think we need to be careful about not judging other people and their choices. I think, I tend to be a pragmatist, and it's like, if it works, then, if it works for you, then that's overall a pretty good thing. And we can start with that. Now, if you yourself are trying to work on this question, and is this something that I should be more or less hesitant about? An example where I think for me anyway, it's pretty clear cut that I wish somebody was a little bit more hesitant. They would not jump to the medication. I had a client one time, and I won't give a lot of detail, obviously going to protect their privacy, but I had a client one time. The situation was, there was a parent who brought their child in and wanted me to talk to to work with their child. And ultimately, it didn't take long before I realized that this parent wanted me to do what I could to get this child medicated. Now, I cannot prescribe medication. I do not have a medical degree. I can sometimes work with physicians or others to try to help that process, but I'm not the one prescribing. And I don't know if she wanted me to diagnose the child or whatever. Excuse me, let me, if we could edit that out. I don't know if they wanted me to diagnose the child or whatever. But the situation was that the child was having symptoms that are very common in a chaotic household environment. And I talked to this parent about the situation and let them know about that. And this parent said, yes, our household environment has always been very chaotic, and gave me some specific issues. And there was some very sad stuff going on in that house. And I talked to the parent and said that I think it might actually be more effective if you come to see me instead of the child, and we can talk about some ways to support this child and maybe work together to make some realistic changes that will help the child's mental health. Never saw that family again. And ultimately, in that case, the parent just wanted the child medicated, was unwilling to make any other changes. And again, this parent had their work cut out for them. So I'm not going to lie. I mean, I can empathize with, like, that's too scary for me. I can see where they're coming from with that. But I think that there are lots of people who might benefit even more from making significant changes in their lives than from taking medication, or maybe just as much. And they're like, no, just give me a pill. I'm not willing to make any changes at all. Just give me something, some kind of medication. So if you can take a look at your own life and ask whether that might be you, I think what I'm talking about is not even, again, not judging you and saying you're doing it wrong, but like, is this what is best for you and for the people in your life? So I guess that's what I would say about the hesitancy, glorifying it versus stigmatizing it. Is it's like, I don't know that there's like right or wrong. It's really a case by case basis, but I do think that there's the risk of both. Honestly, I think that too much hesitancy can cause major problems for people that could otherwise be alleviated very easily with no major. I guess. Oh, sorry. The one other thing that I wanted to share is that anytime we make a change in our lives, we're trading one set of problems for another. Okay. So if you're taking a look at your own life and saying like, well, I'm not taking medication now, and I think about doing that, and I'm just very scared to try it because of potential side effects. Okay. And like Autumn was saying, it's like, yeah, but those side effects also come with benefits potentially. And so we like to keep things the same. I think that we all know people who have been in relationships where it's like you would be so much better out of that relationship, but they don't leave because it's something different, and it would be and they would have a new set of problems. But sometimes we can see very clearly it's like, yeah, but those problems would be nothing compared to what you're dealing with now. So that's another thing to be aware of in your own life. Is it's like, in what way am I afraid to make a change just because I would be dealing with a different set of problems and benefits than what I have right now? And would that different set of problems and benefits be something that I want more than what I have right now? So that's all I wanted to add.
That's good.
Thanks. So this last question, yeah, I'll go ahead and read it. This came in recently from somebody, and the question was about someone's specific situation that they are in, and we weren't totally sure if it was something that they wanted us to address on the podcast or not, or if they were just hoping that we would maybe email them back. So I just want to but we thought it'd be beneficial because these personal stories can be helpful and powerful. So we'll give a vague summary of the situation. This person grew up with a parent with significant mental health challenges and had convinced themselves for a long time that they themselves could not possibly have their own mental health challenges. And their question was also about medication. It seemed like the problem, kind of related to what we were talking about, is anxiety about taking medication. They started trying it and they haven't found it very effective so far. They're really reluctant to continue trying. So they wanted to know, like, what do I do with that anxiety about medication? And I'm basically anxious about being anxious. I'm anxious about treating that anxiety.
Yeah. I think this can be one of those really complex situations where, like, I've seen this in a few different people where they grew up in a household that had a parent or a significant person in the household who had some significant mental health struggles. And then as a result of that, like they grow up almost with like it was a traumatic experience for them growing up into it. And so a lot of times they almost have a trigger to mental health treatments. And that is just like a really tricky place to be, where you're really struggling with your own mental health, but like you have traumatic responses to thinking about going to therapy, or you have a traumatic response to thinking about trying medication because you saw something that you're like in your growing up, you saw that as being like an unsafe thing. And so that makes you feel unsafe. And that's just a really difficult spot to be in. So definitely certainly want to extend, an understanding of like, that's a lot to deal with, and that's hard. And yeah. Autumn, do you have any thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, I think something else that I want to add is, growing up in that type of household as a child, you learn, and I think Wes said it well, that they themselves could not have their own challenges. So if you grow up, in any sort of, kind of dynamic, playing some type of caregiver role. And I'm not saying that this person was, the sole caregiver in their household. But if you have a parent that has, significant health challenges like this person did or does, in some way, shape, or form, you naturally are going to take on more responsibility than you should have to as a child. And so with that comes the mindset potentially of, I don't have time, I don't have space, I don't have the ability to have problems myself. That's not an option for me, because I am, stepping into this role here. There's so much that I need to do here. And so I think the first thing that I would do is just kind of encourage this person to, like, while they're in therapy, talking through that specific issue of feeling like you're not allowed to have your own problems, because something's not going to seem effective, therapy or medicine or, all these other things aren't going to seem effective if there's nothing wrong with you, quote unquote. And so if you've grown up thinking nothing's wrong with me, nothing is allowed to be wrong with me, these things aren't going to feel effective. And so kind of digging more into the root of like, hey, like what are the things that you were not allowed to feel or express about yourself as a child, right? The things that you now have the space to do in therapy. And I feel like I'm playing a little bit of therapist right now, and that's not my intention. But yeah, I noticed that, and I feel like that's kind of one of the more important things to me, at least, that stood out. It's like, if you feel like you're not allowed to have challenges, it doesn't surprise me that therapy might feel like it's not working, or medication might feel like it's not working, because there's nothing to be fixed, when in reality there probably is some things that you can work through. Everyone has that. So
yeah, and I would just add, I think along the lines of what Kelsey was saying too, like so often when we have parents who have really I think we could just say, because we're not talking about anyone in particular, or I'm not anyway, parents who have terrible mental health, and we see the havoc that wreaks in their lives, on ourselves and our families. And so I've seen it many times, as Kelsey was describing. It's like, oh no, I'm becoming my father, I'm becoming my mother. And first of all, I would say, I think on some level, we're all doomed to have some of the same struggles that our parents have because of genetics. And I would say even more because of, they probably raised us in some similar ways to the ways that they were raised. Mm-hmm. And so that's going to turn us out as someone who's going to have probably some similar challenges to what they have. And I think we all need to sort of accept that that's the case for the vast majority of us. Now, that doesn't mean we're doomed to become our parents. Hopefully there's some generational growth. Hopefully we can go farther than they ever went. And if you have kids, hopefully they go farther than you ever do, right? That's a great thing. But you're not doomed to have every single problem that you faced as a kid and that you saw in your parents be you as an adult. So it's very difficult, but to think of yourself as an individual and to remember that if you do deal with some similar challenges, it doesn't mean that it's going to go the same way. It doesn't mean that it's going to carry all this other baggage. You can handle it differently than your parent did. And so, if you're somebody who needs to accept that you have a problem with anxiety and you saw that in your parent and that was wreaking havoc in your family, just remember that you can, by accepting the struggles and the situation as it is and addressing it in the most effective, healthy way that you can tell a different story. And you can have other people, whether it's your own kids or others in your life, take a look at the way that you deal with your mental struggles. And you can be, you might, if you do the work, you're going to be able to be proud of the way that you're handling your particular set of challenges. We all have our sets of challenges, so it's good to be honest and start from that place.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, that concludes our first Q&A episode. But as our reflection question, this isn't pointed at all, but our reflection question is, think about if you had a question that had to do with something related to mental health, what would that be? What is something that you would like to have a better understanding of in the mental health realm, or that you have as a question to become a better friend for the people in your life who have mental health struggles? As we've said, this is such a broad topic that just really kind of covers every single part of our lives. So just, thinking about what is one question that you might have. And if you would like, you can always submit that question. We are trying to periodically put it up on our Instagram options for people. And so we will be sure to do that this week. And we always have our email available to us as well. And you can always slide into our DMs, not in a creepy way, but just to submit a question. But yeah, always good to be thinking about what areas you would like to have more knowledge about within the realm of mental health. So yeah.
And I personally really appreciate that last question, and that the person was able to open up a little bit about their own life. And I'm not saying that anybody else has to do this, but those can end up being some of the most helpful, powerful questions that we can address on the podcast. And so just like we did here, we will protect your identity. We're not going to say anything that's going to point out who you are, even to someone in your own life who might be listening to this. We'll do what we can to make sure they don't know we're talking about you, right? They might say, oh, wow, interesting. That's similar to what my friend is going through. But we're going to be so vague that they're not going to know we're talking about you. So don't be afraid to do that. And I would love to take a podcast and just answer like 2 or 3 of those questions and really get into it, just to offer our perspective.
Yeah.
All right.
Autumn, do you want to share our socials? Yes.
Yeah. Follow us on Instagram at embrace.mental.health. Look on our story. Be on the lookout for place where you can submit Q&A, or like Kelsey said, you can non-creepily slide into our DMs, and you can also email us at embracementalhealthnsc@gmail.com. And then you can also find us on Facebook. Just look up Embrace Mental Health, and you'll see our podcast logo.
Yep. All right. Thank you to everybody who submitted questions, and thank you to everybody for listening. We'll see you next week.
Bye.